Hey, Pat.
Hey, Angela.
Good to see you.
Nice to be chatting with you. We've been chatting off and on for quite a while, and um, I'm excited to learn what you're up to with this new course you've been developing or you've been offering recently. And just a reminder to folks who are listening in of your amazing background. I know everything I learned, limited as it is, but I learned everything I know from the top tier people about in Pilates from you yourself and the first generation teachers that you introduced me to. And then the same for gyrotonics. You were I learned about gyrotonics from you and met Julio, who developed it. And so I've learned so much from you. And I also know you're an amazing body worker, massage therapist, as well as a teacher of the Feldenkrais method. Did I leave anything out there, Angela?
No, I think that'll do it. I think that'll do it. And I love the way all those pieces thread together. From my
Right.
background, growing up as a gymnast and then a dancer, and then having gone through severe injuries and rehabbing, using all the techniques you talked about, and
Yeah.
then studying them and finding such interesting ways in which they actually weave together in terms of principles and thoughts.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, thanks for bringing in that part about the gymnastics and the dance performing arts background. And yeah, you've had some uh, unwanted but beneficial, I'm sure, in their own distinct ways, direct experience um, of these ways of regaining function, improving function. And I think sometimes I know I've looked at my own life, maybe you too, of the various things we've learned. And then
Mm.
sometimes you might wonder, well, that was kind of a wandering path, but if we hadn't wandered in those directions, we wouldn't have developed the insights and the distinctive offerings that we have.
Yeah, that's actually an important point. In the gear shift I made from being a performer, a gymnast, a dancer, in which you're creating a certain form, a certain expression, right? And a certain technique, a certain line in your body, right? And
Right.
rely on your body to be able to, so you fall down, you get back up, you're fine, you keep going. And so, having performed at a really high level, it was quite shocking for me to have that power taken away when I initially was in a bad car accident in my 20s, which is what led me on this path. And
Hmm.
it really changed my perception of time because you can't jump up and just go back to what you were doing, as I had become accustomed to in my body. And it led me on an internal search and changed my relationship within myself, and then offered me a career of sharing that with others, by being a movement and bodywork professional. And I feel like it was a very rewarding transition because there's it's such a gift to see someone feel better, to see the results. It's very different than being on a stage where you don't have that personal relationship, and to work with people one on one or educating teachers in groups and experience the what becomes of their lives, how it expresses through their lives and their new sense of well-being and expression of themselves.
Yeah, I love that. I hear you saying how much, if you will, such gratitude and joy comes from not only our own successes and expressions of what we dream and want to be with our lives, but then helping others to achieve those dreams and reach those goals carries its own deep reward and gratitude. And it's such a, a loving place to come from, where in my view of wanting to help others be best they can be. And there's many ways of doing that, and you and I have found our ways. And speaking of which, you've got this new program you've put together called
Yeah,
Neuroplasticity and Exploration in Movement.
that's
And
right.
yeah, and you're offering this course again coming up in April 13th, 17th, and May 11th. So
Online, yes.
yeah, online. So people can access it from anywhere in the world, right? That's the
Right, that's right.
beauty of online learning. What would you love listeners to know about this course?
Well, I am super excited about this course because I want to share ways to improve the quality of life by using movement to access the brilliance of the nervous system and enhance people's lives. And I look back on my career and I've had a great privilege of success in my field. And I feel like there are secrets within that I'm eager to share and make tangible to others. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, it sounds like a very big promise, but what a promise is to make it obvious, to make it accessible, and to make it enjoyable.
yeah, yeah. That's awesome. I love that. And I'm jotting a few notes here. If you see me looking down, I'm just making some notes so I can capture those great words. Yeah, so I appreciate your desire to increase quality of life and help people achieve their goals and share those with, seems secret, but also can be very obvious. So I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
I want it to become really tangible, right? And so how is that going to happen? It's going to happen experientially, right? So it's not like when people hear the word neuroplasticity, it sounds like a really complex science, right? Like, oh, those are for some other types of people. But there are really foundational elements of it that can be understood by anyone and can be applied by anyone.
Yeah.
And it's all about just the brilliance and the magic of our nervous systems that's now recognized by science in the form of neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
So, what that's taught us is that we are capable of growth and change through our entire lives if we just understand a few of these basic tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. From your background and my background as well, we've known there have been people that have thought, well, this must be happening because we see it happen in the
Yes.
people that we work with. And
Yes.
it just took if you will, science a few decades to catch up and be able to demonstrate it in ways that some people won't believe it until I won't believe it till I see it. Well, they can see it in themselves, but they wanted to see some of the evidence that came about as science has developed the methods to be able to
Yeah. So one
demonstrate
of
that.
the things I enjoy doing is providing some of the history and some of the science to give
Mhm.
people a foundation because it's much easier to buy in if you understand the tangible science behind it.
Yeah, yeah. We're not just making this stuff up.
Right, right. And you and I have the good fortune of having studied the Feldenkrais technique, which
Mhm.
is a system of movement re-education created by physicist Moshe Feldenkrais. And I think of him as a pioneering neuroplastician 60 years before his time, at least.
Yeah,
And what he did really was he realized that movement was a way to access the organization of ourselves
yeah,
and access change in ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's something we'll go into in great depth through the course.
Yeah. So it's in his it's in Feldenkrais's uh, technique or method in his teachings, and it's in the title of your course about exploration. So can you say more? What's special about this exploration approach? And how do you distinguish it from a focus on technique or other approaches to exercise and fitness?
That's really important because I have spent a lot of my life, as you know, teaching exercise systems like Pilates and gyrotonic, and you've done a lot of athletic training and coaching as well, and that's kind of working more like from the outside in, I would call it, like
Mhm.
giving someone exercises to do a certain number of repetitions, a certain way to do them, and expecting that they get results. Yet, if you think about how do we really learn, and you think about an infant, it would be no one tells an infant, okay, now push down on your foot on this part, now do this with your eyes, now do this with your back,
Yeah,
right? No, what
right.
do? They explore, right? They
Mhm.
explore their foot on the ground. And whoops, they put a little funny, so they topple over that way. And then the next time, whoops, they topple over the other way until they find that perfect trajectory. Whoa, and it's got a little instability, which lets them then start to walk. But that is discovered through experimentation. Yeah.
Mhm.
And our nervous system is really a system of wiring and messaging, right? And how we learn is through those reference points of experience, through exploration. So, through the contact with the floor the infant has, through the environment around them, through what they feel, what they hear, they sense. And then culture influences that as
Mhm.
well, right?
Right.
Um, and there are no two of us that are in any way completely alike. Each of us has an as independent of a fingerprint as gait, right? Like if
Mhm.
I saw you 2 blocks away walking toward me and I couldn't see your face yet, I know it was you.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
I know you too.
yeah, like each person has their own
Mhm.
individual gait, right? That's
Right.
embodied through movement. Yeah. Like even our facial expressions are controlled by movement and express movement of our eyes, movements of our
Right.
mouths, movements of our expression of our cheeks, our smiles, our frowns, our tears, right? All of it is movement.
Yes.
And movement is experienced before speech, even. So it's very, very primal in its organization in
Mhm.
us.
Yeah. And yeah, so Moshe Feldenkrais, one of his lines was, movement is life, and without movement there
That's
is no
right.
life. And it is definitely one of those markers of when an organism is alive. And you mentioned
Even when
speech.
cells connect, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Neurons
And
connect.
yeah, and there's always movement happening on many different levels. And you mentioned eyes and speech and people sometimes only think of movement as being those gross movements, and they forget about the movements that are happening that we often don't attend to, so like all the eye movements, the facial movements, the tongue, the speech, the swallowing, the movements in our digestive tract, the
Yes.
contraction of our heart. There's so much movement happening. It's not just about what's going on with the muscles, for
Yeah.
sure.
Let's talk
Um,
about that because I know you had the great pleasure of working with Dr. Esther Thalen, who did more on research of developmental movement than probably just about anybody, right?
she had some influence, and she
Yeah,
taught a
I
lot of the
know.
people that continue her work. Yeah.
But even before we're born, if we look back in terms of evolution of
Mm,
our species, there's those relationships with the tongue, the jaw, the eyes for millions of years, right?
mhm, mhm.
So, and the movement, the undulation of our spine, yeah, which is how we moved ourselves through water, and you see that same sort of rhythmical flow in the gyrotonic method, and
Right.
it's organic movement, but each person has their very own way. Like no two people have the same bone length, bone weight, and
Right.
history in what's happened through their foot, through the shoes they wore, through their activities, through their lives. So how can we possibly give one instruction and expect that to get that individual's best result, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Only that individual's nervous system can recognize its best way for that person, right?
Yeah.
So it's a big paradigm shift from me being the teacher, telling them what to do, correcting them, saying that what they're doing is wrong. It should be a different way to be more efficient. I mean, who am I to think that I know more than your
Yeah.
nervous system, right?
Yeah, yeah. So let me pause you there and pop in a question or two there. As you bring all this up, it's really important points, and you mentioned Esther Thielen and her work, and I think one of the things that she and others who have done the dedicated work of longitudinal studies of development have shown that, most of us figure out how to walk. Not everybody does, but most of us figured out how to walk, but we all took our individual trajectories to get there. The same with
Right.
reaching and all of our movement skills, if you will. And within fitness and recovery from injury, I know some people put a big emphasis on getting the technique down, and
Mhm.
I appreciate the attention to details, and I know biomechanics are important, and I'm wondering how this idea of exploration really fits in, and what does it have to do with how you started to touch on it? What does this have to do with how practitioners work with their clients? How do they how do they teach them to move better, have less pain, change their brains and nervous system?
Right. So I would say step one is respect what the individual is doing.
Mm,
So, if we back up for a minute and look at how did the individual get to what they're doing, their habits created patterns for good reason,
mm,
as strategies for them to get to where they are that day. And the more, I mean, we need habits, right? We want to be able to eat lunch without
right,
thinking about how to pick up the fork, right? But
right.
sometimes, say in a sport, maybe somebody had an ankle injury or something that gave them a little bit of a gimp for a while, but they had to keep performing, right? But maybe
Mhm,
that took that that message, if you will, a line of wiring through their system of a certain pathway of movement that done again and again over time becomes deeply inhabited, I guess you would say. So, for example, athletes, their habits are so deeply ingrained because they've repeated them so many times.
right.
So if you want to change technique, it's very, very difficult to just simply say to change it because their nervous system is firing so fast in that habitual way that
Mm,
there's no word or thought that can go faster than that firing that's automatic in their system. So we have to back up. We have to back way up, take the load off the body so that the body has new options to explore, right?
mm, right.
So for one thing, we have to make sure that the person is in a mode in their nervous system to be able to hear us, right?
Yeah,
The environment. So if they're in too much, if they're in a lot of pain, it's not going to be the time to repattern
yeah,
their stride
right,
running, right? First, I got to
right,
get them out of pain. So first, creating an environment where their nervous system is not in fight or flight mode, where it can listen,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, shift them from that sympathetic, fired up state and get them back into a parasympathetic state where they can feel safe and comfortable and open to exploring and doing something different, something they're not familiar with, and maybe they can discover that there's some other way to be doing what they're already pretty good at, but there's even room
Right.
for improvement beyond that.
So, and what they're already good at, they're probably so good at, they're not even thinking about it anymore. So if we bring them into feeling what they're doing first, so simply making them, taking them inside themselves. So instead
Mhm.
of me saying, you do this, I'm going to have them sense what they are doing and gain a reference point from what they are doing, because they're usually not aware of it, right? and
Yeah,
and and make an imprint in themselves of that. So, and then from there begin to explore variables and experiment with variables. So I'm going to invite them to try different things, and I'm going to invite them to sense what those different things do and which feels best, which feels easiest, which feels most efficient, right? And
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I think you're getting to my next question, which is, what's your take on the roles and the relationship between the practitioner and the client? You know, who's in charge of getting the desired outcomes, or what's in charge? Is it about maximizing the muscles, changing the nervous system? What's your take on this?
my take on this is that if I, as a teacher, think I'm in charge, then I need to check my ego out the door, because there is no way I can get inside someone else's body, right? There's no
Right.
way that my eye and mind are smarter than that individual's nervous system, right? It's that person coming into relationship with what they're feeling and what they sense and explore, and then begin to become familiar with, yeah, so
Hmm.
that they begin to imprint a new sense, a new sense in themselves, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. So that reminds me, you have a section in your course on self-image.
Yeah.
And can you say more about what is the role of self-image? Is this about looking better in the mirror, toning up muscles and getting stronger, feeling better about yourself? What do you mean by self-image?
That's not at all what I mean by self-image. So
Somehow I knew that.
yeah. But I love that, because a lot of us, and some of us are trained to have that as our self-image, how we look in the mirror. I
Hmm.
mean, that's really what we identify with as who we are, right? And that sometimes has a lot of cultural pressure on it, right? But our
Yeah,
self-image is really how we think and feel about ourselves within the world, and that's also influenced by our culture, and is also embodied in our movement. So,
hmm,
for example, a shy person moves very differently than someone who's feeling very self-confident and bold, right? Or someone
right.
who has, for example, back pain or knee pain, or some people have been told that they have bad posture, and so they'll walk in the door and they say, I know I have bad posture, you know. And so these ideas become how they think of themselves, right?
Hmm.
They think, I have bad posture, I have tight hamstrings, I have low back pain, and it becomes a part of their identity, right? and
Right.
and they're walking in the door with it literally in how they walk, but in how they feel about themselves and how they relate to the world and how they relate to relationships. And what, an athlete has a very different self-image and relationship with the world when they're highly successful than when they're injured, you know. It really alters one's self-image to not be capable of doing what one is used to doing, or if someone
Yeah.
perhaps is no longer quite able to garden the way they used to or want to, or reach for things in their home. And it can become depressing and isolating. And so then it takes them in a downward sense of themselves, a downward self-image. And as we go through these movement explorations and we give people new options and they restore their freedom, other things come along with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And and we can see these in the outward actions. I remember Esther Thielen talk about, I don't know totally what's going on inside, but I can see what's happening on the outside. But we have learned through, as the scientists have been able to demonstrate the neuroplasticity, that there are changes that are actually happening in the brain, right? I mean,
Right.
there's shifts that are happening, and I mean, this is some of the, and you may touch on this in your course, some of the things we're first able to demonstrate is, for example, the actual mapping of the sensing and acting, the sensory motor cortex of the brain changes is different in people who are musicians, for example, play string instruments, and they use the fingers of their left hand
Mm,
differently, particularly, and Moshe Feldenkrais talked about this. He posited that the mapping for the left finger of a violinist would be very
mhm.
different than it would be for you and me, who,
Yeah.
I can't remember how to make a C chord on a guitar anymore, versus someone who's fingered a violin fretboard for 30, 40, 50, 60 years.
Right. Right.
You poke those cells, or you do the neuroimaging, and areas are going to light up differently in response to how we've been using our body,
That's
using
right.
the whole self.
That's right. And the uh, more limited we are in terms of how we use ourselves, the less broad are the expressions in our brain as well, and the
Right.
less able we are to change. And one of the things that happens with these explorations in movement is we put people in all different relationships with gravity and positions, and it reawakens options in their body and in their movement. And as it reawakens options in their movement, it also reawakens options in their hearts and in their minds too. It's awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's lovely. Lovely. Um, let me shift us a little bit. You had the one section on self-image, and I know you've got a couple. You visit breath a couple times in your course, and I know depending on people's areas of expertise and what they're familiar with, people have different thoughts and ideas and impressions on how we're supposed to breathe. I mean,
Right. Right.
remember, it's like you can get very specific for it. I think this is still the case. Please tell me if it's wrong. But if I'm doing Pilates 100s, which I haven't done in a while, but if I were, I'd be using a very specific way to breathe in
Right.
support of that activity. And I know others, would suggest, well, you need to be breathing in when you do this, and you need to breathe out when you do that. And I think Moshe Feldenkrais would have said, well, it depends.
Yes.
So, yeah. So what do you think is important for people to understand about breathing, so that you've put two segments about breathing into your course?
I'm going to talk about that from two different platforms. The first
Okay.
is going to be that relationship we talked about earlier between the sympathetic and parasympathetic
Uh-huh.
systems. So, breath is one of the deepest connections in the nervous system that's easily accessible to help make a shift from fight or flight to a more relaxed, nourishing state of being.
Mhm.
And so breath can be used to facilitate that shift. Often holding our breath is one of the first things we'll do in response to stress.
Yeah.
And we become in the habit of holding our breath, which then tells our nervous system that we're in danger, even if we're not. We've just simply gained that habit without knowing it. And yeah, there are all kinds of like, you can go to one Pilates school of thought that says breathe in when you push back on the reformer, another that says breathe out when you push back on the reformer, right? And I think what we want to do is expand our options so that the body can make its best choice at any given
Right.
moment, right?
Yeah.
And usually we have gained some restrictions in our breathing just from how we use ourselves most of the time. We might be breathing more up here, or we might be breathing more in our backs or more or lower. And by breathing in all different ways, we regain the option of breathing in all different ways. And then we can trust the nervous system, once it's regained familiarity with those options, to pick the right option at the right time.
Right.
So
Yes.
one of the things that I like to emphasize is that our nervous systems are our allies, right? They're
Mm.
here to take care of us, right? And when fed the right information, when given the right options, they will choose for our well-being. So like, people aren't holding their breath just because they want tight shoulders, which it will often create, or they're not making their shoulders tight just because they are trying to, they can't figure out how to relax them, and maybe that's because they're holding the breath. I mean, breath is so intertwined with so many aspects of tension and relaxation in our bodies, and movement as well. Breath can help facilitate movement in far more ways than I think we that typically occurs to us as in most exercise systems. And the Feldenkrais method and exploration through movement can really explore that, and breath can become an underlying source of power, if you will, source of relaxation, source of regeneration. Yeah.
Mhm.
It can
Yeah.
it can become many different things if it has the option to calibrate according to the need at the time versus being habituated to a certain mode.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. So I I totally agree that there's so much more power in the breath. There's the, if you will, there's the, if you will, the biomechanical aspect of breathing, and when it makes sense to fill up your lungs and hold that air in there to make your trunk more rigid because you're getting ready to do something that takes a lot of stability, versus times when you need to be more fluid, and and there's times too when you're using your breath very intentionally, or maybe with less awareness, but still functioning as a way to, like you say, regulate that our nervous systems and move us out of that fight flight sympathetic emphasis into the more relaxed and calm and safe and secure, um, paused, creative, parasympathetic. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of, there may be some other things that come along with this when we, if you will, use our breath to use the expression, be still and know. So I think
Yes.
there's many reasons why a lot of spiritual practices and
Yes.
meditative practices have uh, at least one, if not more, approach to their meditation that involves uh, particular ways of breathing, of slowing down the breathing.
Yes, and isn't that useful to all of us in our
Yeah,
life all the time? I mean, there's the athletes that you're training that need to have that inner calm for performance underneath it all, right? But
yeah,
what about just the inner calm in traffic, or on a stressful day, It's like to have these, we have these tools within ourselves, and just to be reminded of them. It just takes a few minutes sometimes, and it can completely shift um, shift our mode of feeling overwhelmed to feeling grounded and to getting more
Mhm.
perspective of a situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
So
think
having
I'd
that.
like to address that again in the difference between typical training and what we're doing,
Mhm.
thinking from these explorations of movement is not only what we're doing, but what are we doing that we don't need to be doing, right?
Yeah. All that. Yeah.
So, right? And
All
it,
those little things we're doing that we don't even know we're doing them probably, and they're not being
right.
very helpful.
So, so is more really
Desired.
more in terms of more muscular strength, or is more really more in more efficiency in movement?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I'll vote for efficiency every time, right?
Yeah.
Because more bulk doesn't necessarily mean more power. Not at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Not at
Can I
all. Yeah.
can I share a little
Yeah.
thing
Go.
that I
Yeah.
and noticed when you and I were working together some time back in Denver? There were many times, when I was working then as a physical therapist, athletic trainer, and including the various things that I had learned. And there were many times when I would get those complicated patients, the way you've gotten complicated clients throughout your life. And I would back then I would do the muscle testing when someone started working with me, and we wouldn't do any strength training per se. We would do things to eliminate these extra habits, release the excess tension, those areas where they were working, if you will, at cross purposes with themselves.
Yeah.
And then, a few weeks later, test them again. They've gotten stronger,
Right. But you haven't done
seemingly gotten
strength training.
stronger
Per
without strength
se. You
training
haven't done
because
strength
they're,
training. Yes,
yeah.
because they're
So,
more efficient. Right. And
right,
it's like when we were talking back about like the baby figuring out its best position for its foot to propel itself upward, to stand, and then to walk, and then to run. There, like I said, there's no two people that are the same, and there's no rhythm that's the same in each individual's movement. And what we're looking for is help each person discover through experimental variations what is their true line of force. How does their force best travel through their skeleton most efficiently with the least excess stress?
yeah,
Not with the most muscular power, but with the least excess stress, because then it's going to be more efficient. There's going to be more endurance. There's going to be less burnout. There's going to be less stress on any individual's joint, because it's going to feed the rhythm from joint to joint to joint to joint, so that the movement just rolls through their body instead of pounding on
right.
some muscles being over strong versus the whole body rolling through movement, if you will, or
Hmm.
waving through movement, as we would say in gyrotonic work,
Right,
right?
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So,
No, I was just going to say, so we become our own expert biomechanist in ourself, if you will. What's our
yes,
own best efficient, most efficient way of moving, and then pulling together all the parts of ourselves that self-image of this is what's possible for me.
yeah. And what I love about it is that when we get to that level of efficiency, when we help others get to that level of efficiency, and we've reduced all that extra tension, right? All that extra tension in the brain was occupying activity in the brain, right?
Uh-huh.
And when the brain just gets to focus on the efficient route, there's a lot more space for creativity and
Yeah. Mhm.
joy, right?
Yeah.
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 Instead of being so bound down in the effort of it all, right? It's
Yeah.
it's a light efficiency that creates a freedom, right? And
Right.
when we feel it, we know it. We know it's right. And people ask, well, what do I have to do to remember this? They feel so good, and how am I going to remember this? And do I need to do stretches to remember this? And what I tell them is, remember the feeling, keep seeking the feeling, keep seeking the sensation of ease. Because
Yeah.
as I said, your nervous system is your best friend. It's going to want to hold on to that kind of knowledge.
Mhm.
So it's like to just trust that the place that's easy and pleasurable is the right place.
Yeah, and if you will, and I know that the robotics people, when they're trying to get their little machines to emulate human behavior or whatever, that at times they like avoid this and go for this. So and like in humans, it's like avoid pain, go for what feels good. So I think what you're talking about, let's get better at going for what feels good, really tuning into what feels good, and let's
Right,
let's
right.
let's create
Right,
more of that.
right, and that's what I love going back to your book is that there's
Mm,
this funny
thanks.
way people have come to relate to pain that puts more and more attention on the pain, right? And as what we discover is that the more attention we put on what feels good,
Right.
then the less the pain there seems to be.
Yeah. 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 So, Angela, is there something we haven't talked about yet that you think it's important for your listeners to know? Anything you'd like to add?
Well, something I'd like to share is that this course is geared towards somatic practitioners. Like Pilates teachers can get 16 hours of CECs, for example.
Mm,
Yet, I've had people from all walks of life enjoy the course. So anyone is invited to join in because learning is learning through movement. It doesn't matter whether it's for the sake of exercise or learning a new hobby, right? Or
right.
just becoming more at ease in oneself, right? It's so I've had people who are artists, people who are mindfulness teachers, people have some old kinks from a car accident, or people who just have been spending too many hours at the computer, people that just want to feel freer, they just want to feel better, and
Hmm.
they're intrigued. It's fascinating work too. And it's a gift to give oneself to spend that many hours going inside oneself. And that's a very rich gift, well deserved.
Yes, I agree, all in service of learning, lifelong learning.
Yes.
So what should listeners do to find out more about neuroplasticity and exploration and movement?
They can go to neuroplasticityinaction.com
Oh, right there it
and
is on the screen. Yeah,
right
or
there. And
let me say it again for those who aren't who are just listening. Neuroplasticityinaction.com.
that's right. You can find a website which will give you some quick tips. And if you want to sign up, we send out emails with information about neuroplasticity and movement, just continuing the educational process. The registration is on the website for the 3-day course coming up again, beginning in April this time. Something I didn't mention is that the course is recorded. So
Mm,
I set it up this time to happen over a Saturday and then 2 weeks to another Saturday, then 2 weeks to another Saturday. So it's 3 Saturdays spread apart. So people have a chance to really assimilate, integrate, and practice what they learned before layering on more. And
great,
then
great.
they get unlimited access to the recordings. So they can go
Awesome.
back to it and repeat it as many times as they want. We're also on
Wonderful.
Facebook and we're also on Instagram.
Okay. With the same neuroplasticity in action.
Neuroplasticity in Action. And we've just created, as of today, a new YouTube channel which you can find videos such as this.
Awesome. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Angela,
Thanks so much, Pat. It's always
thank
a
you.
pleasure.
Exactly. Always a pleasure when we get together. We'll have to do it again real
Let's
soon.
do it again.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Be well.
Yeah.